نقشی از پرده در دست گشاده دو جهان هر شکستی که بود فتح نوید است اینجا غنچه وا شده مشکل که دلی نگشاید غنچه وا شده مشکل که دلی نگشاید بستگی چون رود از قفل کلید است اینجا غنچه وا شده مشکل که دلی نگشاید بستگی چون رود از قفل کلید است اینجا. Welcome to the Hazara Pioneers Library on Amunji Strategy at Mechidtv on the 1st of May 2018, a specially remembered day for the Labor Day. And on the same day, I think all the laborers are busy working to deliver this message that we have a Labor Day today. Say, there's a news for you. Go, oh yeah, that's very good. So, human labor, for which the human masses struggle day in and day out. They go to kar, they go to khana, they go to kar, they go to khana. Parilog manan, chat, kabra makan. Darmandani din jahan. Kadi roza ejniya. Malum. اونچه که مگواز مشه ای امکانش نداره که دل واز نکنه یعنی چی؟ یعنی که بستگی دیگه اونچه بسته بود نه در آرکایوز بود هیستوری گم بود بزین ترواش شده رفت یک پیج دیگه صفحه دیگه لیر بویدیم دیدیم دل واز مشه گلوری داستان. Chapter 29. A Kabul town of sun and dust. Khagbadistan. این رقم یک town است. کابل رو picture من دارم منیزی. It was a strange new life to Gul Begum, this slavery in a city haram after the freedom of her mountain home. یک دختری آزاد منش که در کوهستانای خو کلان شده. او یقدر دیر که دمنه زی شهر کابل دزی حرم سرای بنمانده خیلی عجیب لایف بود برای گل بیگم تجربهش overall. Sometimes she thought that without that awful nightmare of a time she had gone through at Muhammad Jan's, which made everything else seem easy, she would never have been able to have stood it. یعنی او دیگه انتهای حقارت و ذلت که خانه محمد جان که چند وقت تیر کرد اون موشیر پنیت کرد دیگه در حرم سرای خوب دیوتی رو فهمیدد خوب پوزیشن خود جور کرد که کم از کم دو تر جای خونه ایم نه. At first she felt stifled and longed for a draught of mountain air. روزای اول دلش تنگ بود. اما بعدهای صبح شام کوهستان خیلی دیگه می‌آمد. Or what she called mountain air, for it is hard on the plain of Kabul to realize that one is nearly 7,000 feet above the sea level. او هوا را سیکتی کابل خاکباد زیر سرکت. What she wanted was a good climb across rocks. امت پایشی امت میتپید کی چطور ما دیگ دف کوهستانه یک دیده بداو کنم برم امتر بدوم. A keen blast from the snow mountains, a wild coursing of blood in her wind-stirred veins, such as she had enjoyed in the wild days of her girlhood. Kise uzad bud in mirqam, azi ko da u kotal. Paylut. خیلی دلش تنگ شده بود که میتر یک چانس دیگه مرا برابر شونه. عزیزان من در ملبورن در لندن دیگه چه ماست همی ستوری دلشم میخواه اشتور شما دزی کوتل لیتر بایت بورید نه. You remember? That was 19th century. This is 21st century's beginning. Chiala. She had never been cold then, or only for a few minutes. It was so easy for those young and active limbs to get warm with healthy exercise, but in her present confines it was different. The asani khul bigum ro yakhat na makat. Magar de inji xban manda dazi kudul u niye diga u kayfiyat ejniya u zindagi u energy ejna manda. The snow lying in the quadrangle, the sand ki taistan shrush dainale, barfam shda, was soon melted by the radiation of heat from the warm rooms around. Sand ki archik barf shda, iya zatraf khana ke mitarangechiya daga, yesti awshud and the bright sun above. Azunji aftawan burshud, ikhub laish di barf. And became a slush that was very unpleasant to walk in. As many like to run barf ki musha. After every fall of snow, this state of affairs was increased twofold. AMIR arda ki barf mushud inmi kar do barabar mushud. For not only was there the snow that fell from the sky to deal with, there were the heaps of snow shoveled off the roof by the Hazara laborers. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The Hazara laborers on the 1st of May. This is your day. Hazara laborers, the 19th century's end, the Kabul chiskar nadarao. Barf as bale bomb. Ya kho az amu ki khodi barf da sehnam da jam shuda. Yek az bal bomb ki daro Hazara laborers zabitan dakhtare. In al-biyad astani Hazara laborers gosh kene. Ki what is that? In the end of the 19th century in Kabul. Who from time immemorial had earned their living winter after winter in this way. Yani mi Tabistan wa Azra tamsh az Koistan wa diga dumbali kara ki chiz kar kani ma. Az hamesha budaiye mera kham. Kabul yani Shalkot diga tarafi imkan dare Herat u tarafai Kazakhstan zaira diga ye hamesha ez ek taraf na bada. Yani shashmai winter Zimisto locked down, geographical prison. Na roda, na saraga, na you're talking about train. Train more in mind. I'm talking about the 19th century village, Tabali 19th century village. Shashmatu Loki. September baba tha February March ra ki bahar naya. The bahar ki maya zabita tu diga. What are you going to do? Preventing the sun-baked mud of which the Kabul roofs are for the most part formed from becoming a perfect slush and then falling in. Agar u barfa aw nakani, u diga laya zu diga khub lay na tro u khana gili Kabul ra. Zud sarsu biga diga Hazara mazdur dal tarasa Allah shabas. She often looked at these men, her fellow countrymen, at their work and wondered how they could bear it. Each rakam zindagi hai, each rakam kara, each is barizilla da bargi de to qawma. Ira damo taistoi mushahida ka tai dawra taisto total she was in the haram. Ini zimisto ki mushabazi dastan ara meri bari khminganna bazamitar. Hayran mamnak shmu chir qamam deni chiz kar nindro. Ma khoine prisoners of war است ما خو بندیم بایی اینجا خو دواتان خو جنگه. They were not slaves, for these were not prisoners of war. They and their fathers before them had lived in the city for years, but they were far worse treated than any slaves she ever saw. خو اینا غلام هم نیم. بندیم نیه اینا را از جنگ کس اینا خودون چی کار کدوم ده مگر چی رقم اینا رویه اجتماعی قد از این مردم دمن شهر کابل the end of 19th century او رویه را اصلا گل بیگم ندیده بود برش تازه بود هیچی ذلته هیچی حقارته They were in fact the slaves of slaves ordered about struck and if more obstinate than usual beaten as though they had been dogs Haiku tushku sabdaku and these men were free to go where they chose و اونا کس بندیم نکدد که تو دیزی خانه باید شتنی قد یعنی آقایتیه موری بور میشنی بیش but bore all this abuse uncomplainingly هیچ شکایت لغا مکنه تشا مکنه میز نداره حقارت مکنه only turning to scowl at their maltreaters when they were well out of their reach بس کم دور مرات پدر دوکری بس پشته What could it mean? گل بیگم ده ایرانه هیچیه و حضرت چیز کده The Hazaras she had known at home were much the same in character و امی حضره که ده خود منطقه ده حضره از اونجا همده و میشناسه ده شهر خونه ده حضره رو same lazy enough بیکمر or at least disinclined for regular work که بگیم یعنی کارتیه یعنی بارتیه دلچسپی نداره کار بیچم رسن نمونه but they had some spirit and would till their own little pot of land اقلا نموخص همت خودشتن که مو زمین از خود خوره کشت کنه در منطقه and cultivate it at certain seasons with the greatest assiduity making it yield abundantly خب سه زو بار بور مکد اونو حضرت میشناختی که بلی زمین خکارنا مهنت زحمت میکشه و سمار شیرم مخره And so the girl's mind began working away at one of the great problems of life. اینجی philosophical مشه گل بیگم دواره جهان فکر مونه یک دفعی یک مسئله خیلی کلان بزرگ جهان هر جای جهان هستین first of May بلای بور where are you The great problems of life the labor question What is the meaning of labor? نان خطو مخری زحمت میکشی درست تو بری نان منی درو لیکن از تو کی جان تر من سبیتا خورده رهیه See this tunneling, this digging, this hard labor work, this driving, this transporting, this keeping a shop, this transporting letters, this sitting on a chair, typing for hours. These airport people, these people who are serving you, sir, would you like this, sir, would you like this? Shuma kujam mari London mari Australia, mu Australia rahi. Would you like Coke or Pepsi or falani? See, the question of labor. All those who wake up every morning for the sake of children to feed their mouths. And even today, millions of you came out. Na? It is Labor Day. Double car ko bhai, aaj Labor Day. हम celebrate ये गोर कम साथ तेरे की रोज Labor Day. Do you know? बस Labor हम कदर रही तो दराओ. ईरा गुलबेगम दरो सोचना कि ई चिरकम इंसानी मेहनत रहा, इंसानी जान रहा. روحی امو زندگی را که فطرت رو دادن تو او را زو زبیتا اکسپلویت میکنی جو زربورنی برای مکان جورنی زبیتا ای ارجای جهان این اینج گل بیگم مرسا as it exists in Afghanistan and saw the difference between the work of man who has a bit of land of his own and that he is cultivating for himself and for his children after him and the work of the man who merely seeks to provide himself with food from hour to hour and day to day. Rozana kari. Duty. Kar. بریز کی کار نه اونجی دفتره اونجی کارخانه اونجی دکانه اونجی مکانه اونجی فلانه The one possesses the earth and with it the joys of reaping the direct fruits of his labor. یک حاضر او که بل زمین خود خویسته قد دل خکارنا خوب ام مزاقت از خود خمخره. And the other, though he earns his daily wages as best, or rather as worst, he can, in practicality, he is practically a slave. روزانه ورمیدیا گلومانانه ورمیدیا باز دیک جای کدولا ماست خاو کنه. Hazara, 21st century, is it the same story? Oh, we have not been learning our lessons. We have not been remembering the pains that the ancestors have borne and the kind of pains that soul may cry. And has no interest beyond seeing how little he can for the money paid him. مقاد قرار تنخيخ كاركو زياد بالبال نك خود خورا. تمام مقين دمزي كار اختايا. چیز کار نه مگه ما در پشت کار ریم. مگه این میخس بسه که تو تنخواهی دی. And if possible, leaving enough work undone today to oblige his employer to send for him again tomorrow. یا از قصد کار نیم کلی لبیدی که مر صبحان بگی تو صبحان بیا. اینقدر insecure economically. Because you are a slave of the slaves. A kick or a blow for his idleness he would probably and did get. وقتی میگردید صاحبش کی کار نکردم میامد یک چند لغم که حیله مقدر جانچی بازو کم مفهمید دیساب خو باز پشت کار ریم شد. But what was that? A Hazara's skin is tough. Hazara سخت جان است. There was no competition in Kabul. که قدر حاضر بیا کار کو. No higher wages for the better workmen. که امروز ما دمنه امروز نه 21st century شاید امی تامرا دمنه سوسایتی خود بیش نمی که بعضی امگا آن از ازبک بده بال کارگر تو بایر نشان بدی. And other people we are treating like ازبک دیگه کارگر که سلاح من از زمینار برید امروز. There was no competition in Kabul, no higher wages for the better workmen. A certain class of work was paid for by a certain daily wage. اما در گفت که اینی تا کارگرا اینی قد پیسه. او خبر نیه که چیز کارگر منیزی. ام استایا همه از نه. Why try to do it better than your neighbor? وقتی که اردویشی ام داری استایا تو در اور خشته داری بجری داری یا گیل داری وره کاگیل. اوستا امامو پیر میگره که مزدور میگره چرا کوشش کنی که تو بهتر کار کنی. Proficiency brought no better pay. تو هرچی خوب کار کنی هیچ معنا نداره. بس استه تسلی هیچ کوئی ازله نیه. بهتره می که جله کو کار پورا نکتا که صبح رو ببینه. If during the busy season a man had dared to ask more because the demand of workmen was greater, he would have had so many blows with a stout stick from his would-be employer as the reward of his impudence, and no one would have pitied him. اگر بسیار زیاد کارگر کم مشودی نفر مگفت ما دینی قصر بی کارنم دینی قصر بی کار نیتو اولا مشوده سوتاره تمام تماشای سلم کارگرا مرغ نمیزنه خیر. Then even out of the trifling sum these wretched laborers earned, there was a certain proportion that went by right of custom to the man who called them from the street corner where they stood waiting to be hired. Muejan sahib, falani 5 nafar de kar bai ni taraf, janab 5 nafar ni taraf, ma shmo, idu piches ma. There was no fighting against that, of course, though it reduced the already trifling amount received to a mere pittance. Ijna moment. All to skarmoni. Was qasdil khum gainish yazma, ma repeat. Azu migra nifsh de jeb khum paisa tamam nisparu kull shru khort nisf de znam ta taqsim dar taqsim. No complaint, kasish karam nahi itna. Karo. Kya kar sakte ho? Gulbegum saw much of this. And wished she had had her father by her to talk it over with. پدر جان کاش که تو بودی که چی گپایی چی داستانه ای آذر چری رقمه. How she missed her father and how she longed to get news of him. خبر با من از پدریم. What had become of him that night after he had slipped out of the house and away into the darkness and the storm? امو شو كده مني تاركي وطوفان كي ودرمت كجا شد يا بابا جان تو كجا شديتو. Had he indeed escaped? واقعا تنستا فرار كنا. And where was he now? How she longed to know, and how did he fare? Who baked his bread for him? چیال باشه نان مان کس پختمانه بریم زوی نه. Who made his tea? چایم خورد خیلی خوش داشت و چای خوردنی آدمه. Her special task کار گلبیگم بود. Or did he get none at all? کی چای می دوره. When the storm blew bitter blast straight from the Hindu Kush. زمستویا اینو برف هم است بازی گرگودرا بازی پام است از هندو کش و کویا بلندترین کوی اطراف کابل. She shivered in her bed. میلرزید هر وقتی گرگودرا ما شد این میلرزید دجاگه. Not so much with cold نه از خاطر یخ as with fear میترسید گاهی گاهی و خوف and غم. She wondered what shelter he had found her beloved father, how his clothes were wearing. کالایش کو نشته باشه. بگفتم غاری کو استی پدر جان دزی تاریکی دزی باران ای بابای. Whether he had his sheep skins with him, پوستین خودش نداشت خود خو, and his gaiter that she had made. کالای جانج کی جور کرد. And every trifling detail that in so many cases occupies the whole of a woman's thought. و همون ریزه پیزه چیزهایی که کاری یک زن است. مفهمه هنرش یعنی می یک تفصیلاتی ریزه خواهشات و آرامش و دلگرمی و محبتی شوهر برادر پدر باکل all the men you know you men غاقشم که برمشه where do you go you go to the woman and she does it nicely otherwise she is which kind of woman is she. In summer to this free-born girl matters were even worse. باز تا استوی دیگه مایا حالات از اینکه بدتر میشه. The sun streamed down on white mud. خاگا کی افتاوا. The mud that formed the roof ازو خاگی کی امزی خانه کی گلی جور شد امزو کم تباد زده دسراغ ورده. The mud that formed the walls of the house امو خاگی کی یعنی که هر طرف کی دیوال سیل کنی خو خاگ دیگه. The mud in the quadrangle امو خاگی کی تمام سهن است اونمو خاگ. And scorched it through and through. خوب امی افتاو خوب تمام زیر خوب امی تر خاگ منا بختانه. Soon every green leaf dried up. بلغای سوز که بهار آمده بود تمامش خشک and was covered with a thick coating of dust. هر چیز خاک گرفته. خاک بادستان. And everything in the city became of one dead gray color. You know, in the summer, Kabul and all these, even Shalkot is like that. The water in the canal that ran through the quadrangle got low. جوی که از من سین تیر شد این آوجی کم شده. And there was very considerable difficulty in getting water for even the most necessary purposes. All the khana آو پیدا نمشه. The chief secretary hired a special man who was supposed to go down to the river twice a day and fill the musk's skin water vessels. مشک رپراو کده بیرو. روزی 2 دفعه برد بیرید از دریا. But there was no one to see that he either went or returned punctually. کس نیه که امی که رفت آورد وقت آورد نورد تنود در بار سبت شاو. حال خانهش نمایه. The master himself was at the bar all day with his head servant who waited to see that the men at home did their work. As far as possible, therefore, it was left undone. تمام كارم نكر خفتت كمي وشت خصون خانة باشا يوم قلت خو إيه قلقد بدا program ده ونجي. And women confined within the four walls of the haram were the people who suffered. علينا إيش برشدوه إجازين يعني أسد نفر بالده من حرم سراي بنده أو نية. A dozen times a day Gul Begum would go down to the old doorkeeper with her complaint. یک چند دفعه برو بیا او مرتیکه کجا شدم For God's sake tell the man to hurry up with the water. کجا شدم او رفتد. We have not a drop to wash the cooking vessels in oven, and if it is not here soon, it won't have had time to settle before Agha wants his drinking water. بعد از اون الآغا او میخواه او خوردو کجا شدی؟ Give him some شربت then. او کنیه شربت بیدی آقا صاحب را. The old man would answer with a smile. He won't be able to tell whether that's thick or clear when the syrup is in it, and he'll like it all the better. چطور؟ شاید بیشتر خوشی باید. او کنیه نیه دیگه ما چیز کار کنم او نیه. Don't talk nonsense, Kopcha. A Kabuli word for Darwan or doorkeeper. Agha is not a child that I can tell him whether he is to take water or sharbat when he comes in. Don't be so unreasonable, but hurry up that man. What in the name of wonders does it matter to you? I mean, whether the vessels are washed up, whether the Agha gets his drinking water clear or not. If the water carrier does not bring it in time, it is he that will get the stick, not you. Why should you care? This was a Kabul form of reasoning. That Gul Begum could hardly understand. She had been too short a time a slave to realize that most slaves only work to avoid blows. چند روز مشترکی کنیز شده، غلام شده، نوکر شده، بندیه. این نمفهمه که اینا تمام شی گرسره فقط تا که سوتا نبود اینا کار نه فقط مگه سوتا آمد اونش باز یک شور مخرج لازم ونج. Although his wife had nominally managed her father's house, it had been his daughter who had to a great extent regulated the larger and more important matters connected with his property. يقول بيقوم تمام قرار مقدنا قرار بدر خرو ما درش فقط أنا مقدر كي. And more especially with regard to the animals, malara نيجا كذا نكاري بقول بيقوم بود. The milk, butter, ghee, and wool, the spinning and the sending of the yarn down to the weavers who turned it into cloth, both fine and coarse. تمامي management را قول بيقوم بلدا. قول بيقوم's had been a wild but a full life. एक जिंदगी वहशी. Full life, but poor zindagi. Poor zindagi. And by no means devoid of keen interests, it seemed impossible to her to live without some responsibility. The more immediate interest of her own family having been wrested from her, she sought occupation for her active mind in her new surroundings. Active mind and made them her business. But it was almost impossible to meet the difficulties that cropped up at every corner. It was easy enough to report to Kopcha, to her master, for want of activity in the pursuit of the water carrier, but it was a dangerous thing to make an enemy of the only communication these imprisoned women had with the outer world. So often Gul Begum would have to retire discomfited and wait, but once, when the water had been standing outside waiting for some time, the doorkeeper too lazy to bring it in, her indignation overcame her prudence. Look here, old wretch, he said. I hear from Salima that her husband says the water has been standing outside for an hour or more. What do you mean by such laziness? I shall report you to Agha now without fail. You understand me? And she did. Yak saadam go umartika gufta aur ma mujhe ishtom dandarga kasna mera. The old man was very wrath, determined she would suffer in 1,000 petty ways for her zeal. But Gulbegum was not easily cowed. Now she had once put her foot down, she did not mean to lift it up again without a struggle. And if the Hazara slave had occasionally to suffer for her enthusiasm in her master's cause, she found it paid her in the long run. It was not much, the master said, but a rupee cut off his wages for his carelessness. برای جزایز فقط یک روپی از تنخواهش کم کرد. تو خوب کایل شده ها؟ یعنی یک روپی کم. And a threat that he would be dismissed from his exceedingly easy post brought him to his senses. چوکیدار دوش آمد که تنخواهی تو کم نم نصف نم. And made him dread the girl who, in his opinion, took too much upon herself. کشتنی خود خورا بری آقا. او مگه آن ما کشتنیم خود خورا. یک قرض باشه. بری فردا. امروز از من یک روزه. The first time of all in the haram was when the water in the channel ceased to run altogether. Ali au ijna mayada joy. Then indeed things became unbearable. As had guzasht, the frogs whose everlasting croaking had irritated her more or less all day and all night long did disappear certainly. Amo qoqri qoqri gasta shaw roz qoqri qoqri kada mande amona kam az kam rangsh gum shud aw niye dige chiz kar kana. Many of them were dead. Murda banda the scientist parak buden, their bodies doubtless added to the hideous stench that now rose from the open pool of stagnant putrid water. The girl could hardly stir across the yard without feeling sick. The children got fever and other significant complaints, and throughout the town the mortality rose higher and higher. The chief secretary had the water cleared out and the channel scraped, but still the smell continued, though it was perhaps a little less bearable. It's the smell through the channel right into the houses on either side, the man who had cleared it out explained. I can do nothing more unless I clear out the two next houses as well as yours, and then how am I to get out the dead rats and frogs in the part that runs under the house and the street? God knows, the official would say hopelessly. And so the matter was left. In Kabul, there is no Public Nuisance Act, and it would have been against all etiquette for him even to suggest to his neighbors that their drains were in an insanity condition and must therefore be cleared out. मगर ई civic sense दमनी काबुल वजूद ना दरे देश शहर में मर्दम कि वक्त की मसला दमनी गंद उफ्ती दी मसले तमामिया कि एक नफर दिगर तो खुद शिबाय बगबंदे खुदा चियाल अस्ते बिया बोरी मा कोमक कनु कि ज़ेर ज़ीर रफ्ता बाज़ ज़ेर ज़ुखाना रफ्ता बाज़ दे ज़ेर शहर दमनी चनाला रफ्ता है तमाम मसले मुश्किलें ई कुदम एक्टी गवर्नमेंट वजूद ना दरे कि अमी पब्लिक रार चीज़ की अज़ाब मनामुर तुझ तोर पागने ची सिस्टम वजूद दर ना दरे वजूद. Then the wind would rise and blow a fine powder over everything. Bas khag riktid makat bat. The dust lay thick on every shelf and every niche. It filtered through the cupboard doors, as many almaria, kilkina, and settled on old clothes packed away for the winter. Damzu khala, damzu bokcha ki bare zimisto ki tu bokcha ban ke damja garafta. Khag dut darmaya onur kam khag. It filtered through the covers on the bedding and got in among the teased cotton of which it was made. Hatta ki damzu khodi khala darmaya. And had they not been regularly shaken and dusted, every fiber and every seam would have looked as though it had been powdered. Har nakh u rishta malum mushe ki khak baat girifta. And then at last the storm would break and the blessed rain would fall. Ta ki baran namne da. And that was the one treat Gul Begum had. Yak cheez ki barish dilch khosh na. Watching the storm as it advanced up the broad valley, she would creep quietly up on the roof and watch the tufan rasail. How refreshing to her burning feet and hands was the icy air that always precedes the final burst. How thrilling the momentary hush when even the kites and the crows are still. And when the wild dogs seek out some temporary shelter in the rocks or among the faggots by the roadside cut ready to bring in to the town for fuel. Yadamani chobai shardar memat, yadamani ughardar memat sagam khamosh. Paran rahmat, badaziglazeniter, qaraqarari. And then the great final, akhri, the burst itself, the roar of the cannonade among the mountains, echoing and re-echoing from one peak to another. Azuko, dozuko, echo, echo. The rending of the rocks above, the swishing of the rain that fell in torrents, obscuring everything, but the livid flashes of lightning that seemed to penetrate through everything. Then it was that her spirit rose and she almost fell free again. Then it was as though her soul found something kinder to it in the free soul of the storm and the wind. Come out of that, mad woman, old Sardara would call. Oh, Devna Dukhtar, Tabia, come down from there at once. Did ever anyone hear of such insanity? Tu Devna shde tu? Actually provoking the God above to strike you dead with his lightning, sitting in the storm there when even the very beasts, haywanat, have had sense to seek shelter. Bashar wujud na dar tamam da gor khudaram da tu chiz mein khaye mujhe bilbam. And who is going to nurse you when you're ill? Think you? Yegu kar shuna masalan? Kitu tadabina? She would go on peevishly, not understanding in the least wherein the attraction lie. Hayrana ki chiz mein khaye ji. Icherinji balwale tu pish tufanam da. And she found a little sympathizer. Her little mistress, Dukhtari, Chief Secretary, a perfect baby, hardly able to toddle in the heavy shoes that she was made to wear. Would come and land herself on the slave girl's knee, all of a heap, and sit by the window and watch too. That was a big one, you know. She would say, and hide her face for a moment from the dazzling glare on her companion's breast. Tell me about the lightning, Gul Begum. What makes it come? And where does it come from? The child would ask, hark, as the thunder rolled close over where they sat, almost it seemed above their very head. It comes from the clouds. Gulbegum replied, not knowing what to answer. And what are the clouds, John? Ah, listen to me, the baby lips would say, seeing that the girl was only half attending to what she would say and was gazing far away into space. Tell me, Gulbegum, what are the clouds and how can they make all that noise? You must know because you are always watching them. You must ask Agha. I think, darling, I don't know, was all the girl would say. It always seems to me as though they must be charged with powder like the gun. Ho? Powder gunpowder mera. And that when they touch the mountain tops, they burst just as a gun might do. Boom! And send forth the flash and the roaring just like a gun, but I don't really know. That's the only way I fancy. There was another moment of keen joy to Gulbegum in her slavery. It was just before the sun rose on the horizon. When there was the first weird glimpse of the day, when the cold, pale, bluish-green streak first made its appearance far away in the eastern sky, and gradually warming and warming, spread further and further up into the heavens, telling that a new day was receiving its birth. Gulbegum knew nothing about color, nothing of artistic effects. At last, nothing that could be defined. She could never see or heard of a picture, but that was the hour she preferred to all others in the day or night. It was the time when she thought of her father and longed to be with him. The time when pure thoughts and a sense of duty to be accompanied ungrudgingly came over her, and something more than that too, a new feeling to which she could have given no expression. Something that was in an instinct born of a curious circumstances under which she was placed, but which she did not yet understand. It was the dim consciousness that a place that had been empty was being filled, and that by her, unobserved by everyone, even those most concerned perhaps, but that was no matter. یک جای پر شد در خانه، خالیش داد پر شده، سیستم میچله درو. She had found a new care, a new duty that was to fill the place that her father and little sister had always occupied. But it was the first draw of something more than that, of the passion than which no stronger or holier can animate a woman's breast. The first dawn of an unselfish, self-sacrificing love, ready to give all and to ask for nothing in return. Gulbegum knew nothing of that. She would only sit and watch the sky as she had watched the shadows on the Hazara hills, and dream, or rather let unformed dreams just filter through her brain, for they left nothing behind. And an hour later, had anyone said, "What were you thinking of as you watched the sky?" she could truthfully have answered nothing, for she was unconscious of anything but a feeling of rest, the hope and trust in something that was above and beyond her. And that hour at dawn was a time she was quite sure to get all to himself. That was the hour in the 24 hours when all Kabul slept. Clocks were there plenty, and there was the bell that rang to warn the workmen that it was time to assemble in the various factories, but that was the foreigner's signal, and that of the prisoners and the workmen who served the government under him. It had nothing whatsoever to do with the good town folks. And as the court slept, the Amir slept, the town slept, and I hope you have awakened. Thank you very much. Catch up with you later.